You are the master of your fate. Let's begin. There is a quiet ache I've seen in the eyes of men and women who have given too much of themselves to something they once believed in. They carry themselves with a kind of dignity, a sense of duty, but beneath it there is fatigue. Not just of the body, but of the spirit. They speak of loyalty as a principle, as a code they live by, and in many ways, it is noble. But what they don't always see is the slow, silent cost. The way that loyalty, when misplaced or unexamined, begins to drain their potential, dull their ambition, and distance them from the life they were meant to live. I've watched brilliant minds stay in roles long after they stopped growing, not because they were trapped by contract or circumstance, but because they felt bound by gratitude, by history, by a promise made in a different season. They tell themselves they are honoring a commitment, that they are being faithful, responsible, true. And yet, year after year, their energy wanes, their confidence erodes, and their sense of purpose fades. They are not failing, they are fading. And the tragedy is that no one praises the man who walks away from a sinking ship, not even himself. We are taught from childhood that loyalty is a virtue, that we must stand by our people, honor our word, stay true to those who stood by us. But no one teaches us when to stop. No one warns us that loyalty, like any force, can become destructive when it is no longer aligned with truth, with growth, with the direction of your soul. I want you to consider for just a moment that staying loyal to a person, a path, or a past decision does not always mean you are doing the right thing. It may mean you are avoiding the harder, more courageous choice. Because real loyalty is not blind, it is discerning. It asks, does this still serve? Does this still grow? Does this still align with who I am becoming? In this conversation, I'm going to walk you through what I call the loyalty tax, the hidden price you pay when you stay loyal to something that no longer serves your highest purpose. You'll learn how to distinguish between noble commitment and self-sabotage disguised as virtue, how to recognize the subtle signs that you're sacrificing your future for the past, and most importantly, how to make the kind of decision that doesn't betray your values, but fulfills them. This is not about abandoning people or breaking promises. It is about clarity. It is about courage. It is about understanding that the greatest act of loyalty you can offer the world is not to remain where you no longer belong, but to become who you were meant to be, even if it means walking away. There is a weight that comes not from lifting heavy things, but from carrying unexamined decisions, especially those wrapped in the language of honor. I've seen men stand by businesses long after they ceased to grow, not because the venture was still viable, but because this company gave me my start. I've watched women remain in relationships that no longer nourish them, telling themselves, I can't leave after all we've been through. I've observed leaders stay silent in meetings where they knew the strategy was flawed, bound not by truth, but by a sense of obligation to the person who appointed them. In each case, the word loyalty was used like a shield protecting not the relationship or the mission, but the fear of change, the discomfort of conflict, the risk of being seen as disloyal. And yet no one speaks of the cost, no one measures the years lost, the confidence eroded, the ideas never voiced, the life half lived, because loyalty, when it is not guided by discernment, becomes a slow tax on your future. It doesn't announce itself with pain. It creeps in through resignation, through quiet compromises, through the gradual acceptance of less than you know you're capable of. I remember a man in Cleveland in the 1920s, a gifted engineer who had been taken under the wing of an older inventor early in his career. That man gave him his first job, trusted him with critical designs, and spoke of him as a son. When the mentor's business began to decline, the young man stayed, refusing offers from larger firms, believing it would be a betrayal to leave. For 12 years, he remained, defending outdated methods, silencing his own innovations, watching as others surpassed him. When I met him at 48, he was bitter, not because he regretted his loyalty, but because he realized too late that staying was not an act of honor. It was an act of fear. He had confused obligation with virtue. He had mistaken endurance for integrity, and in doing so, he paid a price far greater than gratitude could justify. This is the unseen burden of staying true. It feels noble in the moment, but over time it hollows you out. It teaches you to suppress your instincts, to ignore your growth, to place the comfort of others above your own evolution. And the world rarely intervenes. It rarely says you don't owe your life to someone else's past, but I am saying it now, because loyalty without boundaries is not strength. It is self-abandonment dressed in a respectable coat. So I want you to ask yourself, what are you holding on to not because it is right, but because you feel you should? What relationship, role, or path are you maintaining out of a sense of duty, even as it dims your light? Because until you confront that question, you will keep paying the tax year after year, decision after decision, believing you are being noble while your future quietly slips away. There is a quiet deception at work in the hearts of good people, the kind who value commitment, who honor their word, who believe in standing by those who stood by them. They tell themselves they are being loyal, responsible, faithful. But beneath those noble words, there is often a deeper truth they refuse to name. They are afraid. Afraid of judgment, afraid of failure, afraid of starting over. And so they use loyalty as a cover, a justification for staying in a role, a relationship, or a path that no longer serves them. It feels safer to say, I can't leave, I'd be betraying them, than to admit, I'm not sure I can succeed on my own. It feels more honorable to say, I made a promise, than to confess, I'm scared of what comes next. But let me tell you what I've seen in the lives of those who break free. The moment they stop hiding behind loyalty and face their fear, everything changes. I once worked with a woman in Chicago who led a small but respected marketing agency. She had built it alongside her business partner for over a decade, and when differences in vision began to emerge, she wanted to expand, innovate, take risks. He preferred to maintain the status quo. She stayed, not because the partnership was thriving, but because we built this together. She told me leaving would feel like failure. But after months of stagnation, sleepless nights, and growing resentment, she finally admitted the truth. She wasn't staying for him. She was staying because she doubted herself. The day she named that fear, I'm afraid I won't make it on my own, was the day she regained her power. She didn't leave immediately, but she began making decisions from clarity, not obligation. She set boundaries. She explored options. And within a year, she launched her own firm, stronger, bolder, more aligned with who she had become. Her former partner didn't collapse, the world didn't end, and she didn't feel guilt. She felt relief, because she had stopped using loyalty as a shield against courage. This is the pattern I've observed again and again. When a person avoids a necessary change, they rarely admit it's fear. They call it duty. They call it honor. They call it loyalty. But the result is the same stagnation, frustration, the slow erosion of self-trust. Real loyalty does not require you to sacrifice your growth. It does not demand that you silence your instincts or abandon your purpose. On the contrary, true loyalty to yourself, to your mission, even to the people you care about, requires the courage to act when something is no longer working. Because staying in a broken system doesn't honor it. It prolongs its decay. And the most courageous thing you can do is not to endure, but to evolve. So I ask you, where in your life are you using loyalty as a reason not to act? Where are you avoiding a necessary change because it feels safer to frame it as a moral obligation? Because until you separate duty from fear, you will keep making choices that protect your comfort, not your future. And the world doesn't need more people who stay out of fear. It needs more who leave when it's right, with integrity, clarity, and the courage to become who they were meant to be. There is a powerful force in human nature, the desire to repay what has been given, to honor those who believed in us when no one else did, to remain faithful to the people and moments that shaped our beginning. And this instinct, this sense of gratitude, is not only right, it is essential. But like all good things, it can be distorted. It can become a chain disguised as a debt, a moral obligation that grows heavier with time, not because the giver demands it, but because we convince ourselves we must pay it forever. I've seen men stay in dying businesses because Mr. Thompson gave me my first job, as if loyalty were a life sentence. I've watched women remain in unfulfilling roles because this company took a chance on me when I was nobody, as if progress were disloyalty. The past becomes a ghost that sits at the table of every decision, whispering, you don't get to move on. You don't get to outgrow. But let me tell you what I learned from Andrew Carnegie, a man who rose from poverty to build an empire. He never forgot those who helped him, but he never let their memory dictate his path. He repaid his debts not by staying small, but by becoming great. He honored his mentors not through silence or submission, but through achievement. When I asked him how he reconciled moving beyond the people who first supported him, he said, I don't repay a man by limiting myself. I repay him by living up to the belief he saw in me when no one else did. That is the distinction so many miss. Gratitude is not the same as obligation. To honor someone's belief in you does not mean you must remain in the place where that belief began. It means you carry that belief forward into new challenges, into greater responsibilities, into the full expression of your potential. The past should be a foundation, not a ceiling. The man who gave you your first job doesn't want to see you stuck in the same role at 50. The mentor who guided you doesn't want you to silence your voice out of fear of disrespect. If they truly believed in you, they wanted you to grow beyond them, beyond the moment, beyond the limits of what they could imagine. And yet so many of you carry the weight of owing as if it were a debt that can never be settled. You stay silent in meetings, you reject opportunities, you suppress your ambition, all in the name of honoring someone who may no longer be alive, who may not even remember the moment they helped you. That is not loyalty, That is a misunderstanding of what legacy means. Real legacy is not preservation, it is progression. It is taking what was given and building something greater. So I want you to ask yourself, where are you letting the past dictate your present? Where are you staying small out of a sense of debt, rather than moving forward out of a sense of destiny? Because the greatest way to honor those who helped you is not to remain where they placed you, but to go further than they ever dreamed possible. That is not betrayal, that is fulfillment, and that is the only repayment that truly matters. Time does not always announce its cost. It doesn't come with receipts or warnings. It simply passes quietly, steadily, and in its wake, it leaves behind not just age, but conditioning. I've seen it in men and women who, over years of staying in roles they've outgrown, begin to believe their own limitations. They were once bold, once curious, once full of ideas that burned in the dark. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, the fire dims. Not because they lacked talent, not because they stopped trying, but because the environment they remained in, out of loyalty, obligation, or fear, taught them, day after day, that their best thinking wasn't welcome, that their boldest moves would be resisted, that their growth was inconvenient. And the human mind, when consistently denied expression, begins to shrink. It adapts. It learns to survive, not thrive. It stops reaching, stops questioning, stops believing that anything can change. I remember a man in Pittsburgh, a brilliant strategist who stayed for over a decade in a mid-level position at a firm where leadership resisted innovation. He told me, "I used to bring new ideas every week. Now I don't even think about them." When I asked why, he said, "It just stopped being worth it." That phrase, "it stopped being worth it," is the epitaph of unrealized potential. It's not failure, it's surrender disguised as realism. He wasn't lazy, he wasn't complacent, he had been trained to disengage. The cost of that training wasn't measured in lost promotions or stagnant income, though those were real. It was measured in the quiet loss of confidence, in the erosion of self-trust, in the way he began to doubt not just the system, but himself. He stopped believing he could influence anything because for 10 years he hadn't been allowed to. And that is the true danger of staying where you no longer belong. It doesn't just delay your progress, it reshapes you. It teaches you to accept less, to speak quieter, to aim lower. You begin to mistake endurance for strength, silence for wisdom, and resignation for peace. But it is not peace, it is exhaustion wearing the mask of acceptance. I've seen this pattern in executives who stay too long under authoritarian leaders, in creatives who remain in soulless jobs because the pay is good, in partners who tolerate emotional distance because we've come too far to leave. They are not broken, they are diminished. Their potential hasn't vanished, it's been suppressed, layer by layer, decision by decision, until they can no longer feel its pulse. And the tragedy is that they often don't realize it until much later, when they look back and wonder, what happened to the person I used to be? But here is the truth you must hear. Potential is not a fixed thing. It is a living force, and like any living thing, it requires space, light, and movement to grow. When you stay in a place that does not challenge you, that does not value your highest self, that does not allow you to act on your deepest convictions, you are not being patient. You are starving your own future. So I ask you, where in your life has your thinking grown smaller? Where have you stopped bringing your full self because you learned over time that it wasn't welcome? Because until you recognize the quiet erosion, the way loyalty to the wrong thing can slowly teach you to settle, you will keep paying a price far greater than you realize. Not in money, not in status, but in the silent loss of who you were meant to become. There is a subtle trap that ensnares even the most thoughtful among us, the belief that we must remain loyal to the identity we once claimed, as if who we were 5, 10, or 20 years ago should dictate who we are today. I've seen men cling to businesses, titles, or philosophies not because they still serve them, but because this is who I am. The entrepreneur who refuses to pivot because we're a traditional company, the leader who won't delegate because I built this with my own hands, the artist who keeps producing the same work because that's what my audience expects. In each case, the decision isn't driven by strategy or growth, it's driven by identity. And identity, when it becomes rigid, is not a foundation, it is a cage. Because the truth is, you are not the same person you were when you started that business, made that commitment, or took on that role. You have learned, you have changed, you have evolved. And to demand that your present choices align with a past version of yourself is not loyalty, it is self-betrayal. I once worked with a woman in Detroit who had built a successful consulting firm based on a specific methodology she developed in her 30s. By her 50s, the market had shifted, new tools emerged, and her clients began asking for innovation. But she resisted. When I asked why, she said, "If I change, I'm not being true to what we stand for." I replied, "Are you being true to your purpose, or to a version of it that no longer fits?" That question unsettled her because deep down she knew she had grown beyond the framework she was protecting. Her loyalty wasn't to her mission, it was to the image of herself as the creator of that method. And in defending that image, she was stifling her own evolution. This is the danger of identity-based loyalty. It confuses consistency with integrity. But real integrity is not about staying the same, it is about staying aligned with your values, your purpose, and the truth of who you are becoming. The man who built his company with his own hands does not dishonor that effort by hiring a team. The artist who pioneered a style does not betray it by evolving. On the contrary, they honor it by refusing to let it become a museum piece. Growth is not disloyalty, it is the natural consequence of life. And every time you choose to remain fixed out of fear of losing your identity, you are not preserving yourself, you are denying your potential. I've watched men like Carnegie and Ford reinvent themselves not once, but repeatedly. They didn't cling to titles or methods, they clung to principles, to purpose, to the relentless pursuit of what was next. And because of it, their influence didn't fade, it expanded. So I want you to ask yourself, where are you holding on to a version of yourself that no longer serves you? Where are you resisting change, not because it's wrong, but because it feels like a betrayal of who you used to be? Because the highest form of loyalty is not to your past self, but to the future one, the one who is still becoming, still rising, still ready to do what only you can do. And that future self doesn't need your protection, it needs your permission to grow. We speak of loyalty as if it were a permanent state, as though every commitment made in good faith must be honored without end, regardless of how much has changed. But this belief, that a promise once given must be kept forever, is not wisdom. It is a dangerous oversimplification of human life, where growth, circumstance, and purpose are always in motion. I've seen men bind themselves to partnerships, careers, and even relationships with the same rigidity they might apply to a legal contract, as if loyalty were a matter of endurance rather than judgment. But life is not static. People change, markets shift, values evolve, and to hold yourself to a decision made in a different season, under different conditions, with a different understanding of who you are and what you're here to do is not virtue. It is rigidity disguised as honor. I remember a young executive in the 1920s who signed a 10-year agreement to lead a division of a growing firm. At the time, the mission aligned with his purpose, the leadership inspired him, and the future seemed bright. But within 5 years, the company's values had eroded, the original founders had left, and the culture had turned political and reactive. He came to me torn bound by his word, yet suffocated by the reality. "How can I leave?" he asked. I gave my promise. I said, "Did you promise to serve the company as it was, or as it is?" He paused. That question cracked open the illusion. He had not promised to endure decay. He had promised to contribute to something meaningful, and that something no longer existed. The truth is, not all commitments are meant to last. Some are meant to serve a season, not a lifetime. A mentorship ends when the student becomes the master. A business partnership dissolves when visions diverge. A role becomes obsolete when growth demands a new level. And to pretend otherwise is to deny the very nature of progress. I studied this closely in the lives of men like Henry Ford and John D. Rockefeller. Ford ended alliances, shut down product lines, and restructured his company not once, but repeatedly. Not out of betrayal, but because he understood that loyalty to a vision is higher than loyalty to a structure. Rockefeller dissolved partnerships when they no longer served the direction of his enterprise. He didn't see it as disloyal, he saw it as necessary, because he knew that clinging to what was past would prevent him from building what was next. This is the myth we must dismantle, that loyalty means never leaving, never changing, never walking away. It does not. True loyalty is not measured by duration, but by integrity, by whether your presence still adds value, by whether the relationship, role, or path continues to serve mutual growth. When it no longer does, the most honest act is not to stay, it is to acknowledge the shift, to honor what was, and to move forward with clarity. So I ask you, where are you holding yourself to a promise that no longer fits the truth of who you are or where you're going? Where are you using the word forever to avoid the discomfort of a necessary ending? Because the world doesn't need more people who keep promises beyond their purpose. It needs more who have the courage to recognize when a chapter is closed and the wisdom to begin the next one. Loyalty without discernment is not virtue. It is sentimentality masquerading as principle. It is the kind of blind allegiance that keeps good people in failing ventures, silent in broken systems, and emotionally bound to relationships that no longer serve mutual growth. I've seen men stay in leadership roles long after their presence ceased to add value, simply because I was asked to lead. I've watched women remain in partnerships where respect had faded, telling themselves, "I made a commitment." But real loyalty, deep, enduring, meaningful loyalty, does not demand blind obedience. It demands awareness. It requires you to ask not just, "Can I stay?" but "Should I?" And that is the work of discernment. the quiet, courageous act of examining your commitments not through the lens of obligation, but through the lens of truth. When Andrew Carnegie restructured his empire in the early 1900s, he didn't do it impulsively. He didn't abandon his team or his vision. He assessed calmly, thoroughly, where his presence was essential, where others could lead, and where change was necessary for survival. He didn't see this as disloyalty. He saw it as responsibility. Because the highest form of loyalty is not to a title, a tradition, or a memory. It is to the purpose behind the commitment, and purpose must be protected, not with blind faith, but with clear eyes. Discernment means asking the hard questions. Is this relationship still growing both of us, or only maintaining comfort? Does my presence here add value, or am I simply filling a role out of habit? Am I staying because it's right, or because I fear the unknown? Would the person I'm loyal to want me to sacrifice my potential for their ease? These are not selfish questions. They are necessary ones, because loyalty that drains you doesn't honor the other person. It weakens you both. The leader who stays in a role he's outgrown doesn't serve the organization. He blocks progress. The partner who remains emotionally distant for the sake of stability doesn't preserve the relationship. He erodes it. True loyalty looks beyond the surface. It sees not just the history, but the future. It recognizes when love, duty, or partnership must evolve or end. I once sat with a man who had been loyal to his mentor for over 2 decades. When the mentor's health declined and his judgment faltered, the man faced a crisis: continue supporting decisions that harmed the business or step back. He chose the latter, not out of betrayal, but out of deeper loyalty to the mission they had built together. He said, "I'm not leaving him. I'm protecting what we created." That is discernment. That is maturity. That is the kind of loyalty that lasts, not because it clings, but because it chooses, again and again, what is right over what is easy. So I ask you, where in your life are you avoiding discernment? Where are you letting emotion, guilt, or fear override clear judgment? Because the world doesn't need more blind loyalty. It needs more wise loyalty, the kind that sees clearly, acts courageously, and honors not just the past, but the future. And that begins the moment you stop asking, "Can I stay?" and start asking, "Should I?" There is a quiet tragedy I have witnessed too often: the man or woman who gives silently, endlessly, believing that suffering in silence is the highest form of loyalty. They show up early, they stay late, they absorb the weight of others' expectations, the friction of misaligned visions, the emotional toll of unspoken resentment, all while telling themselves they are being noble, responsible, faithful. They wear their exhaustion like a hidden badge of honor, as if the depth of their sacrifice is proof of their character. But let me tell you what I've seen in the lives of those who finally break free. Their sacrifice was not honored, it was expected. And worse, it was rewarded with more demands. Because when you consistently give beyond reason, people don't see your virtue, they adjust their expectations. They come to rely on your silence, your endurance, your willingness to absorb the cost. And in time, your presence becomes not a gift, but a given. I remember a woman in Philadelphia who managed a small nonprofit founded by her late father. For 15 years, she ran the organization alone, handling operations, fundraising, outreach, while the board took credit and the community assumed someone else was leading. She told me, "I do it for his memory." But when I asked how she felt, she said, empty. She wasn't bitter toward her father, she loved him deeply. But she had confused loyalty with self-erasure. She had sacrificed her life not to honor him, but to avoid the discomfort of stepping into her own power. And the truth is, he wouldn't have wanted that. No parent who believed in their child wants to see them shrink in the name of remembrance. No leader who entrusted a mission wants to see it carried by a ghost of a person. Yet this is the fate of silent sacrifice. It goes unnoticed, uncorrected, until the giver is hollowed out. The cost is not just lost time or missed opportunities. It is the erosion of self-respect, the slow death of ambition, the belief that your needs are secondary, that your voice is less important, that your presence is only valuable when it costs you something. I've seen executives endure toxic leadership to keep the team together, only to lose their confidence and quit years later in defeat. I've watched partners tolerate emotional neglect for the sake of the family, only to grow resentful and disconnected. In every case, the sacrifice was not celebrated, it was normalized. And that is the danger. We elevate the martyr, but we do not see them. We do not ask, "Why are you carrying this alone?" We assume their endurance is infinite, but it is not. And when it finally breaks, it does so not with a declaration, but with a quiet withdrawal, a loss of fire, a retreat from contribution, a life unlived. So I ask you, where are you sacrificing in silence? Where are you bearing a burden that was never yours to carry alone? Because true loyalty does not require self-destruction, it requires balance. It requires that you preserve your strength so you can serve from fullness, not depletion. The world does not need more martyrs, it needs more whole, powerful, present people, those who give not from obligation, but from overflow. And that begins when you stop measuring your worth by how much you endure and start measuring it by how clearly you contribute, on terms that honor both your loyalty and your life. Most people treat loyalty as a vow made once and binding forever, as if the moment you commit, the decision is closed, the path set, and any reconsideration is a sign of weakness. But this is not how living, breathing, evolving life works. People change, circumstances shift, priorities transform, and to hold yourself to a decision made in a different season, without ever pausing to ask whether it still serves, is not fidelity, it is rigidity. Real loyalty is not static, it is dynamic. It is not a tombstone marking where you once stood. It is a living agreement, one that must be reviewed, renewed, or released with conscious intent. I've seen men stay in failing partnerships because we shook hands on it, as if a handshake could suspend the laws of growth and change. I've watched women remain in roles that no longer challenge them, telling themselves, I committed to this, as if commitment were a life sentence rather than a contract with the present. But the most powerful minds I've studied, men like Carnegie, Ford, and Edison, did not operate this way. They reassessed, regularly, ruthlessly, not out of fickleness, but out of discipline. They understood that loyalty without review becomes inertia, and inertia in the world of achievement is failure in slow motion. Carnegie, for instance, conducted what he called relationship audits every 6 months, not to find reasons to leave, but to ensure alignment. He would ask, is this partnership still growing both of us? Does this person add value I cannot get elsewhere? Am I operating at my best within this structure? If the answer was no, he didn't panic. He didn't burn bridges. He adjusted. He renegotiated, or if necessary, he ended it with dignity. This is not disloyalty. This is stewardship. Because your time, your energy, your focus, these are not infinite. They are the currency of your legacy, and you must spend them where they yield the highest return. So I want you to do something radical. Stop treating your commitments as permanent. Start treating them as current agreements, ones you have the right and the responsibility to evaluate. Begin by listing the key areas of your life where loyalty is at play, your primary work relationship, your closest partnerships, your major roles and responsibilities. Then for each, ask, if I weren't already in this, would I choose it today? Is this still aligned with my purpose, or am I maintaining it out of habit? What would I gain by reevaluating this? What am I afraid of losing? These questions are not threats to loyalty. They are its guardians. They prevent you from drifting into obligation, from sacrificing your future for the comfort of the past. Reassessment is not betrayal. It is clarity. It is the act of a person who values their word not by how long they keep it, but by whether it still means something true. And when you make this practice a habit, when you stop assuming and start choosing, you reclaim your power. You stop being carried by momentum and start steering with intention. Because loyalty worth keeping is not the kind that survives by default. It is the kind you consciously renew day after day, decision after decision, because it still serves life, growth, and truth. There is a fear that stops more people from making necessary changes than any other. Not the fear of failure, not the fear of poverty, but the fear of being seen as disloyal. They stay in roles, relationships, and routines long past their expiration because they believe that leaving, no matter the reason, will be interpreted as betrayal, ingratitude, or weakness. They imagine the whispers, after all they did for you, or you're just giving up. And so they remain, sacrificing their future on the altar of perception. But I want you to understand this, how you leave matters far more than that you leave. And when done with integrity, clarity, and respect, a departure does not destroy trust, it builds it. I've seen men like Rockefeller and Carnegie step away from partnerships, ventures, and even lifelong associations, not with drama or denial, but with a quiet dignity that commanded greater respect than if they had stayed. They understood that honor is not found in blind endurance, but in truthful action. They did not vanish, they did not attack, they did not justify endlessly. They explained, they thanked, and they closed with grace. You can do the same. The key is not to frame your exit as rejection, but as evolution. You are not saying the past was wrong, you are saying the present demands something different. You are not blaming, you are clarifying. And in that clarity, you preserve not only your integrity, but the respect of those you're leaving. Here is how to do it. First, prepare your reason, not as a defense, but as a statement of truth. Keep it simple. Avoid over-explaining. Say, "This has been important to me, but I've reached a point where my path is leading in a different direction." Or, "I can no longer give this the energy it deserves, and that wouldn't be fair to you or to me." These are not attacks, they are acknowledgments of change. Second, express gratitude specifically and sincerely. Name what you gained. "I'm grateful for the trust you gave me when I was just starting," or "I learned more from this role than I could have imagined." Gratitude disarms resentment. It shows you're not dismissing the past, you're honoring it. Third, offer a clean transition. If applicable, help train your replacement, document your work, or stay on briefly to ensure stability. This proves your loyalty was never performative. It was real, and you're ending it responsibly. And fourth, hold your ground with calm. You do not need to justify repeatedly. You do not need to win an argument. A simple, "This is my decision," spoken with quiet certainty, carries more weight than 100 emotional defenses. I once advised a young executive who had to leave a mentor's company after a decade. He feared being labeled a traitor. Instead, he wrote a letter, short, warm, clear, thanking his mentor for the opportunity, stating his need to pursue a different direction and offering 3 months of transition support. The mentor, after a moment of silence, said, "I wish more men left like this." That moment didn't end their relationship, it deepened it. Because respect is earned not by staying, but by acting with honor, especially when it's hard. So I ask you, where are you avoiding a necessary departure because you don't know how to do it with dignity? Because now you do. And when you leave, not with anger, not with guilt, but with clarity and care, you don't burn the bridge. You strengthen it for others to cross and for you to return if ever the path leads back. There is a false belief that circulates in the hearts of loyal people, that to step back, to create distance, to disengage from a role or relationship that no longer serves growth, is somehow a failure of feeling, a hardening of the heart, a betrayal of warmth. But let me tell you what I've observed in the most effective leaders, the most enduring creators, the most influential minds. Their power did not come from constant involvement, but from strategic detachment. They understood that presence without perspective is noise, that immersion without reflection leads to blindness, and that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do for a person, a project, or a purpose is not to dive deeper into the chaos, but to step back and see it whole. I watched Henry Ford, at the height of his success, withdraw from the daily operations of his company not because he lost interest, but because he knew that his highest value was not in managing details, but in shaping vision. He detached, not emotionally, not morally, but operationally. And in that space, he gained clarity. He saw inefficiencies others missed. He anticipated shifts in the market before they arrived. He became not less loyal, but more effective. This is the essence of strategic detachment. It is not abandonment. It is not indifference. It is the deliberate choice to remove yourself from the whirlwind so you can think, decide, and act from a higher level. The surgeon does not operate with trembling hands. The general does not command from the front line. The architect does not build while holding a hammer. Each must at times step back to see the whole, and so must you. I've seen too many capable people exhaust themselves by staying too close to the fire, answering every message, attending every meeting, absorbing every emotion, believing that their value lies in their availability. But availability without judgment is not service, it is surrender, and the cost is steep: diminished insight, eroded boundaries, and a slow loss of authority. When you are constantly reacting, you cease to lead. When you are emotionally entangled in every outcome, you lose the ability to make clear decisions. But when you practice detachment, when you create space between stimulus and response, between demand and action, you reclaim your power. You begin to operate not from impulse, but from intention. You stop being pulled in 10 directions and start moving in one. This does not mean you become cold, it means you become focused. You care deeply, but you no longer allow that care to hijack your judgment. You honor your commitments, but you no longer let them consume your identity. You stay connected, but on terms that preserve your clarity. The artist detaches from the audience's opinion to create truth. The leader detaches from daily chaos to set direction. The partner detaches from conflict to restore connection. In each case, distance is not disloyalty, it is discipline. So I ask you, where in your life are you too close to the action to see the truth? Where is your constant involvement blurring your judgment, draining your energy, or distorting your purpose? Because freedom does not come from doing more. It comes from stepping back just enough to see clearly. And in that clarity, you don't lose your loyalty. You refine it. You make it sharper, wiser, and far more powerful than it could ever be in the noise. We have been conditioned to see loyalty as a backward-facing force, an allegiance to what was, to who helped us, to the promises we made in moments of lesser understanding. But if loyalty is only about the past, it becomes a chain. It becomes obligation without direction, emotion without purpose. True loyalty, deep, meaningful, enduring loyalty, must be forward-facing. It must be measured not by how long you stay, but by how much you add, not by your endurance, but by your impact. I've seen men cling to failing ventures out of a sense of duty, believing that their presence alone is valuable. But presence without contribution is not loyalty, it is decoration. It is the difference between a lighthouse and a lamppost. One guides ships through stormy seas, the other merely lights a porch. The world doesn't need more people who show up, it needs more who elevate. And that requires a shift from seeing loyalty as a debt to be paid to seeing it as a force to be applied. When Andrew Carnegie stepped away from the daily operations of his steel empire, he didn't vanish. He redirected his energy into education, believing that his greatest loyalty was not to the company he built, but to the future he could shape. He didn't stop serving, he started serving at a higher level. That is the redefinition I ask of you. Stop asking, am I fulfilling my obligation? And start asking, where can I contribute most powerfully right now? Because loyalty that keeps you in a role where you're half present, disengaged, or misaligned does not honor anyone. It weakens the mission. It disappoints those who believed in you. It wastes your gift. On the other hand, the leader who steps into a new challenge because it demands their full strength, the partner who sets a boundary to preserve the health of the relationship, the employee who leaves to grow so they can return with greater value, these are not acts of betrayal. They are acts of higher loyalty. They honor the spirit of the commitment, not just the letter. I once worked with a man who left a long-standing board position not because he disagreed, but because he saw a greater opportunity to influence policy at the national level. He told the board, "I'm not leaving you, I'm serving you by becoming more effective." And he was right. His influence grew, his insights deepened, and when they needed counsel later, he returned, not as a ghost of his former self, but as a man who had expanded. That is the power of contribution-based loyalty. It doesn't ask, "Where have I been?" It asks, "Where am I needed most?" It doesn't measure faithfulness by time, but by transformation. So I want you to consider this. What would change if you stopped measuring your loyalty by how much you endure and started measuring it by how much you elevate? If you judged your faithfulness not by your presence in a seat, but by the weight of your impact? Because the truth is, you do not serve people by staying small, you serve them by becoming who you were meant to be and bringing that full self to the work that matters. That is not disloyalty, that is devotion at its highest form. You've walked through the quiet tensions of loyalty, the weight of gratitude, the pull of obligation, the fear of being seen as unfaithful. You've seen how easily virtue can become a prison, how quickly devotion can turn into self-betrayal when it's not guided by truth. And now, I want you to carry this final truth into the world with unshakable clarity. Your future does not belong to the past. It does not belong to the person who gave you your first chance. It does not belong to the partner who stood by you in hard times. It does not belong to the company, the role, or the identity you once claimed. It belongs to you. And no act of honor, no debt of gratitude, no promise made in good faith justifies the surrender of your potential. The men and women who truly changed the world did not do so by staying where they started. They did so by outgrowing, by evolving, by having the courage to say, "I can no longer serve here." Not because I don't care, but because I must serve at a higher level. Carnegie didn't build libraries to repay a debt. He built them because his loyalty was not to a single man, but to the belief that knowledge should lift generations. Ford didn't keep making the same car forever. He moved forward because loyalty to progress outweighed loyalty to habit. And you? You are not here to preserve the past. You are here to shape the future. So do not let guilt silence your ambition. Do not let fear disguise itself as virtue. Do not let the comfort of familiarity keep you from the work only you can do. The highest form of loyalty is not blind endurance. It is wise movement. It is the courage to say, "I honor what was. I am grateful for what was, but I cannot live there." And when you make that choice, not in haste, not in anger, but in clarity, you do not break faith. You fulfill it. Because the person who believed in you didn't want you to remain small. They saw something in you that others didn't. And the only way to honor that belief is to become what they saw. Not to stay, not to suffer, not to sacrifice silently, but to rise. So go now, not with guilt, not with apology, but with purpose. Release what no longer serves. Protect your energy, claim your direction, and build what only you can build. The world is waiting, and your future is not for anyone to hold hostage, not even in the name of loyalty. This is not a philosophy to ponder. It is a principle to act on, because until you apply it, you remain bound by the illusion that loyalty means never leaving, never changing, never evolving. But now you know the truth. Real loyalty is not measured by duration, but by alignment. And alignment must be maintained through courage, not habit. Here is your assignment, simple, direct, and designed to break the inertia of silent obligation. Begin today. 1. Conduct a loyalty audit. Take a clean sheet of paper or open a new document. List the 5 most significant commitments in your life. Key relationships, personal or professional, your primary role or position, long-standing obligations, projects, partnerships, promises. Be honest. This is for you, not for anyone else. 2. Ask the defining question. For each commitment on your list, pause and ask, if I were not already in this, if I had to choose it today, with full freedom, would I still say yes? Write down your answer. Don't rationalize, don't justify, just feel the truth. This is not about blame, it's about clarity. 3. Identify the heaviest tax. Look at your list. Which commitment is costing you the most in energy, growth, peace of mind, progress toward your purpose? Circle it. This is your primary loyalty tax, the one draining your future in the name of the past. 4. Decide your next move. For that one circled commitment, choose one of 3 paths and commit to it. Renew, you choose it again, fully, with fresh energy and clear terms. Renegotiate, you stay, but with new boundaries, expectations, or conditions. Release, you prepare to leave gracefully, with honor, on your terms. Set a date, make a plan. Even if it's 30 days from now, name it. 5. Speak your truth if needed. If your decision involves others, draft a short, respectful message. No blame, no over-explaining. Use one of these templates. I've grown in a new direction and can no longer give this the focus it deserves. I'm making a decision for my future, not a judgment on you. I'm grateful for what we've built. Now, I need to move forward. Keep it dignified, keep it final, then deliver it with calm. You are not here to live in the shadow of old promises. You are here to honor them by becoming who they believed you could be. And that person doesn't stay. That person rises. Now, close this screen. Open your document. Begin the audit. Your future is waiting, and it demands more than your loyalty. It demands your courage. Remember, your success begins the moment you decide to act.